Hey everybody, happy Sunday to you. I hope all is well. We are quickly cruising through this course in 1305 here. We're already in week 3. While you didn't have anything due this past week other than to read chapter 1, Introduction to Substance Abuse Counseling, I hope you stay on top of that because unlike 1305 where you have a weekly assignment, this one you may not have one, but your quizzes are built on every 3 chapters you read, you'll have a 25 question quiz. So it's important you stay on top of the readings and not get behind. So I hope you did that. Week 3, we talk about ethical and legal issues in substance abuse counseling, and there are both. Absolutely in chapter 2, and this is your first DB in here. So this DB is set up a little differently than our others. You still are required to use your textbook as a resource. Because you have to be able to explain your logic, and there's no word count here, right? I mean, I need you. Let me back way up. So on this DB, you will be doing a case study from your book on Jamal, I believe. Yes, Jamal. It's located in chapter 2 on page 47. It says to answer these following 4 questions. What are the possible legal issues of the situation? What are the possible ethical issues of the situation? What impact does it have, counselors, to an obligation to the client? How would you resolve or address this case? So here's what I need. I don't need a word count, but I do need it to, first, I don't need 3 pages or anything like that, so be reasonable there. And I don't need 2 sentences either, or 4 sentences either. Be mindful in your thought process. As long as I can follow your thought process, we're good, right? Make it make sense. Use your textbook as a resource. That you must cite a resource in there. And again, I got to assume everybody knows how to do that in APA because I've heard from no one about it. So my hope is you've watched the video, which was a requirement, the APA video, and you've looked at the examples I've put in Blackboard. So at any time, if you need some help, please reach out and I'll do a video call with you and go over it line by line and walk you through it. But this DB, like I said, no word count necessarily, like in the other class. And I know it says that in the syllabus, but I'm telling you now, there's no word count. Just make it make sense. What I do not want is let me back up. What you can do is you can put subheadings. Number 1, here's the question. How would I do that? You can do that if you want for these. Normally I wouldn't allow that and I would want it to be in 1 paragraph form, but I think in this case you can answer the questions, but I need more than 1 sentence as an answer. There's more than 1 sentence that belongs for these questions, and then you make those in your format. So long as you do that, we'll be fine, but you still want to have, like when you're asking, how do you know it's a legal situation? How do you know it's an possible ethical scenario? Like, where are you getting that information from? It's got to be the textbook, right? And if you have another resource you'd like to cite, feel free. But that's going to be this DB. Your original post is due Thursday by the end of the day, and you must respond to 2 of your peers. And again, I'm not going to hold you to a word count on your responses, provided they're more than a couple sentences. They need to, try to stay around that 100, 150 count. Don't go into 700 word responses by any means. But don't go into 50 word responses either. Make it make sense. Like I said, make it have some sustenance to it, right? Because here's the thing with legal and ethical issues. This is why our documentation is so important, right? There's a saying in our industry that is, if I don't document, it didn't happen, right? I document everything. You have to, because while 99% of it may never be an issue, all it takes is 1, right? And I'm going to give you a couple real world examples of what I mean. So I've had 2 in my private practice over the last 6 years. I've had 2 people dispute charges on a credit card, which they put on file themselves. 1, I won immediately because I had all my documentation. The second one, however, was for an intervention, and I had a contract signed. Now, I could have got an attorney and gone that route, probably cost me more money than it was worth, and it's just not a good look, right? So I lost that one from the bank. Not because I didn't have documentation, though, but I'm saying documentation isn't it. Had I chosen to take that to court, I had a contract signed for that reason. I won't do an intervention without a contract signed, but that's another story altogether. But documentation matters, right? For a couple of reasons. And why am I talking about documentation right now when we're just talking about this case study? Well, because it's about ethics and legalities, right? We work with, most LCDCs work in centers of some kind. And our documentation, our clinical documentation, is how we get more days for our clients through insurance. They have to meet medical necessity to be there. So our verbiage matters. I've mentioned in both courses that I'm going to challenge you on the language you use. And it's important we get to know the correct verbiage, right? And how we word things to continue to get those days, right? We're never dishonest. We're never stretching the truth in any way, but we do become wordsmiths, right? Because it matters. That is part of client care. I don't know too many people that like it, right? But the reality is, learn to love it, because it's part of taking care of your client, right? I was audited once by an insurance company. Treatment plan. That's all they wanted to see, but it was from about a year prior. No problem. Pulled it right up, had it, sent it to them. No big deal, right? Because I did my documentation. That could be very scary if you're not up to your documentation. You got to stay on top of those things, right? Other ethical things that can come up, like ethics have always been fairly cut and dry for me, right? Like, don't sleep with a client, don't have them remodel your bathroom, and don't overcharge them, right? It's pretty simple standards. Just be a good human, right? But what if there's other ethics that come up? What about gifts from clients? What do the rules say, right? I'm going to encourage you to look that up. I was going to do a bonus points with it, but not to your next quiz. But I would encourage you to look that up and find out what that looks like as an LCDC. There's a price limit on gifts. Can you even take gifts? If so, how much can they be, right? It's very different from license to license. My LPC license is different than the LCDC license and their requirement. So speaking of ethics, then let's talk about this. What is the requirement for an LCDC to befriend a client at any point? Is there a requirement? What does that look like? If so, I would encourage you to look that up in the rules and regulations. You need to know that, right? Because a lot of these folks get attached to you. And look, I've worked with some really cool people I'd love to just hang out with, right? That's not my role. And I can't put that role in jeopardy, because what if they want to come back, right? So I'll just tell you, the LCDC rule says 2 years. From the time you discontinue service, can you befriend this person? LPC license says 5 years. The facility I worked at, Memorial Hermann at the time, said never. My own personal philosophy is never as well, because that's just not my role. I want to keep that professional role and that boundary. So rule of thumb is, you have different ethics boards. You always go by the one that governs your license, in our case, an LCDC. But in my case, I have an LPC board, an LCDC board, American Counseling Association board. They all have ethics, right? And some may be a little different. So you go by whichever is the most stringent. Right. And so think about this. These things happen. So ethically speaking, we all have social media, I'm guessing. The rule of thumb the rule was at our facility that you, again, had to follow the LCDC. You couldn't be friends with the client, period. It's not a good look, right? So I was flicking through social media, and a colleague had a Facebook post came up. I think it was Facebook, Instagram, I don't know. It's been a few years back. It's been many years ago, actually. I wasn't asking to see it. I wasn't looking. I'm just flicking through, and here it is. Her and I were friends. And there's a picture with a client that I know hadn't been out of treatment 4 or 5 months. What do I do with that? I didn't ask to see it. I didn't want to see it, but now I did see it. What does the ethics say on that? You see something, you say something. Why? Because it affects our entire reputation. Not only, and why is that important? Because it keeps people from getting help. I painted houses for a living for about 20 years. And if my painters or myself messed up a paint job, okay, it was inconvenient for the homeowner, but they'll hire another painter. There's a billion of us, right? They're not going to be like, oh, I'm never going to paint my house again because of this bad experience. Not in most cases. I know there's probably always one, but not in most cases. But when it comes to counseling and mental health behavioral stuff, look, here's the thing. If I have a bad experience with a counselor, I might not go back, right? And so it's very important we maintain that boundary. And documentation and ethics and legalities are a huge piece of this. What are you going to do when you see a couple who one may have a substance use issue and then all of a sudden there's a divorce a year later and they're subpoenaing your notes? Like you got to be mindful of that, the things you document, how you document. But there's much more time to learn about those things. But we're always considering ethical and legal dilemmas. I'm not telling you that to be scared of what you're doing by any means. Our number one goal is to help our clients, right? There's a saying, and I always mess this up. I don't know if I've heard it's pronounced both ways. Non-maleficence or non-malfeasance. I say non-maleficence. I don't know who's right. Don't care. It means do no harm. That's our number one code as clinicians, right? So how does that look like? Well, I'm not the ethics piece. I'm not hurting a client by flirting or by giving special privileges, or special privileges meaning maybe I see this person for free for 10 times. And we're allowed to do certain things like that. It's a whole nother conversation. I'm kind of getting sideways here on it, but there's just things we do, right? Maintain your professional boundaries, because we can harm a client without really meaning to or considering, right? Like, for example, if I don't have documentation and I get audited and then they come back what's called a clawback and they want the client to pay a bunch of money for these services that they don't want to pay for. If I don't have the right documentation, which is my ethical and legal responsibility, then what am I doing there? It's part of their medical record. Now, how I document is also part of my ethical responsibility, in that how I have to walk the line, so to speak, of putting what I need in a note to get justification for treatment, yet without putting too much in there, because that could be very harmful for a client. So just some things to consider that we might not consider as ethics, right? And so this is a little more cut and dry than that, I think, with the case of Jamal, and I always look forward to reading these, what your thoughts are on the ethics here. So ethics are always going to be a part of what we do. Our career is based on ethics, right? Look, my reputation is one of two things actually in this field, and I couldn't be prouder of it. One is that I'm very direct. I'm direct with love, but I'm very direct. The other is I fly straight as an arrow. I don't bend the rules. I don't break the rules. The rules are there for a reason, and that is to keep our clients healthy and safe, and that is our role. Right? My role as a clinician is not to make choices for my client because I think it might be better for them. My role is to educate and walk with them through their choices, right? So I need to be clear on that. So this week is again on ethical and legal issues. I love these topics, man. I could talk about these all day. On that note, if you ever do want to just chop it up about ethics, legalities of counseling, what it's like to have a private practice, what it's like to work in a facility, anything related to this field of study or work, please hit me up. I'm always happy. Email me. We'll schedule a time for a phone call. I'm always happy to talk to you about this, classwork or otherwise. As we move into next week, week 4, already a quarter of the way through almost, major substances and effects. You read chapter 3, and there's also a Blum article, it's called. I think Blum is the author. And you do your first quiz, which will be on chapters 1 through 3. And then the following week, week 5, ideology of substance abuse is chapter 4, and you won't have anything due there. And then you'll have your next quiz due. So you start, then you have assessment, diagnosis, treatment plan settings, and then individual treatment, then your treatment plan, which is due week week 9. That sounds far away, but we're already coming up. This is already week 3. So it gets here like that, right? So be thinking about these things as these chapters. Super important you read them because they really do layer on each other and build to get to the treatment plan. And I mentioned in the 1300 video about problems and being aware of how to diagnose, and as LCDCs what our scope of practice is, right? And that is working with people with their substance use disorders, working with co-occurring disorders as it relates to their substance use disorder, marital family problems as it relates to their substance use disorder, career problems as it relates to the substance use disorder, right? And so how that looks in a treatment plan, just to give you a little heads up, because as LCDCs, we don't diagnose mental health. We don't diagnose mental health diagnoses, right? That doesn't mean we don't need to be familiar, because we absolutely need to be familiar with them, because it explains so much, and we need to know about them. So how that looks in a treatment plan is my diagnosis is all as an LCDC will always be a substance use disorder. That's the primary reason I'm seeing them, working with them. But that doesn't mean in the treatment plan, in my first problem statement in a treatment plan, and we're going to talk much more about that as we go, but our first problem statement will always be substance use disorders, right? Then, though, we have other problem statements. I don't have to have a diagnosis of bipolar or depression to have a problem statement of mental health issues, right? Depression issues, as evidenced by this is the symptoms they had. They've reported, right? Anhedonia, which is a great word, by the way. That's going to be a bonus question at some point, maybe after your next quiz. Anhedonia is a wonderful word. It just means not having interest in things you used to have interest in. It's a cool way to say it. I love that word. I'm fascinated with that word. FYI, that will be a bonus question at some point in the semester. As evidenced by anhedonia, fatigue, sadness, sleep disturbances, right? We always want to put as evidenced by. That's the support. We can't just say client reports they're depressed. What does that mean? Right? That's why it's important we as evidenced by and list the symptoms, right? But we can absolutely do that as LCDCs as a problem statement. This is something they want to continue to work on, right? I hope that makes sense for you right now. But as I said, in this course, this coming up week, you have your first DB and it's different. Just remember to answer those questions and give me some good answers with some meat to it. Not just little one word, one sentence answers. I won't take that. You'll lose points for that. Hear me on that. Give me some thought through answers, right? That you've really put some effort into, and you'll be fine. Be sure to use your textbooks as a reference. If you need some help and don't understand the APA, you got to reach out to me before the assignment's due. Because once it's due and turned in, it's too late, right? Like, I'll still help you for sure, but as far as points goes. And then next week you have your first quiz. You'll read the article, the chapter 3. You'll have your first quiz on 1 through 3. The following week, week 5, you'll read chapter 4, and you don't have anything due. And I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but remember, chapter 8 will be our treatment plan. Then week 8 or week 9 will be our treatment plan, which is worth a quarter of your grade. Then week 14, you'll have a 2 to 3 page paper, nothing major, on either motivational interviewing or cognitive behavior. That's the second big grade. They're both worth, those 2 assignments are worth half your grade. So all that said, we'll talk much more about that as we go. I hope you guys have a great week. If there's anything at all I can do to help assist you, or like I said earlier, if you just want to chop it up about the field of study or work or this course or anything at all, I'm always happy to do that with you. So guys, I hope you have a great week. Easy for me to say. I hope you have a great week, and we'll talk soon.